I'm JMNE, your narrator. Make sure you subscribe to our channel for more stories. Nate Arden stared at the ornate invitation in his hand. The silvery letters shimmered in the dim light of his tiny starship cabin. You are formally invited to dine with Ambassador Cineri of Venera Prime. Your presence is requested for a cultural exchange of utmost importance. It had the smell of a scam, or worse, another one of those half-baked alien pranks that ended up on Galactic reality feeds. But to be fair, Nate wasn't in a position to turn anything down. His interstellar fitness studio had gone bankrupt weeks ago, and a string of low-paying gigs hadn't even covered his fuel. He figured he could at least score a free dinner. If Cineri wanted to exchange some culture, well, Nate could flash a charming smile and throw in a flex or two. At least the dress code's easy, he muttered, straightening his cleanest shirt. When Nate finally arrived at the Star Spire ballroom on Vuna Prime, he had to remind himself to keep his mouth shut. The place looked like something out of a luxury holodrama. Sleek, marble-like floors that shimmered faintly, tables glowing softly under hovering lights, and walls etched with intricate patterns that pulsed in soothing hues of blue and silver. The crowd, well, they were clearly the Vuna elite. Tall, slender, elegant figures with flawless jade-green skin and golden hair cascading like liquid silk. Their eyes, metallic silver and disturbingly observant, followed him as he was led through the room. He couldn't tell if they were judging or just curious. Probably both. "Ambassador Cineri will see you now," a soft voice hummed. A glowing drone floated beside him, guiding him to the far end of the hall. At the grandest table, he spotted her. Cineri was impossible to miss. Her golden waves framed a face that looked sculpted. Her full lips curved into an amused smile. She wore a flowing dress, if you could call it that, made of shimmering silver lines that hugged her body. The lines pulsed softly as if alive, tracing her curves like a living constellation. "Mr. Arden," she purred as he approached. Her voice had a strange rhythm to it, like music laced with velvet. "You're more punctual than most humans I've met." "It's Nate, actually," he replied, trying to sound confident while his brain screamed, "What the hell are you doing here?" "Nate," she repeated, as though testing the name on her tongue. "Sit, join me." He slid into the chair opposite her, feeling out of place, but doing his best not to let it show. The table, a sleek piece of transparent crystal, seemed to scan him as he sat. Plates and glowing utensils materialized in front of him. "You must be wondering why I've invited you," Cineri said, resting her chin lightly on her hand as she studied him. Her eyes were unreadable but intense, as if peeling him apart molecule by molecule. "Curiosity is killing me," he said, forcing a smile. "But I'm guessing you didn't bring me all the way here just to try the Horus." Her lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You're observant, Nate. That will serve you well tonight." That sounded ominous. Before he could press her further, plates began floating toward the table. Each dish looked stranger than the last. Purple gelatinous orbs that pulsed softly, fruits that gave off a faint hum when touched, and something that looked suspiciously like glowing sushi. Nate eyed the food warily. "A delicacy on Vuna," Cineri explained, plucking a glowing fruit and biting into it delicately. Her silver dress shimmered faintly as she moved, and Nate's eyes lingered a moment longer than they should have. He forced himself to clear his throat. "So, Ambassador," he started, trying to steer the conversation. "What exactly do you do here?" She arched an elegant brow. "I ensure the survival of my people, Nate. It is no small task." "Right," he muttered. "That's broad." Cineri tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing as though she were suddenly curious about something. Before Nate could react, a thin blue beam shot out from the edge of the table, scanning his torso like some sort of high-tech spotlight. "Whoa, what the hell?" Nate blurted, sitting bolt upright. Cineri smiled. This time, it was undeniably mischievous. "Apologies, Nate. A standard procedure. You see, Human physiology is a subject of particular interest to us. Around them, several heads turned. Other Vumi diners were now watching, some amused, others barely hiding their smirks. Nate felt his ears go hot. "Do you mind telling me why I feel like I'm part of a talent show?" "You misunderstand. This is purely scientific," Cineri said, her voice dripping with mock innocence. "However, I do need a clearer assessment." "Assessment of what?" "Your fitness, of course." Before he could process what she meant, she gestured lightly and a faint hum filled the air. The shimmering light beam intensified, and suddenly Cineri said, "Stand, Nate." He blinked. "Wait, stand. Why?" "Do not be shy," she said smoothly. "Please remove your shirt." Nate's jaw nearly hit the table. "You can't be serious." "Entirely serious." A murmur rippled through the room. Nate could feel the eyes on him now, alien onlookers watching this bizarre human spectacle with growing amusement. "I'm not taking my shirt off in the middle of dinner," he hissed under his breath. "Oh, but you must," Cineri said with a sly smile, her silver eyes glimmering like twin moons. "For the science, Nate. For the science." "My ass," Nate thought bitterly, but something about Cineri's gaze, a teasing challenge lurking behind her calm facade, made his pride flare up. "Fine," he growled. He stood slowly, cheeks burning, and peeled off his shirt. The hum of alien conversation dipped into silence. Someone, somewhere, gave a polite clap, which only made things worse. Nate stood awkwardly, bare-chested and mortified, as Cineri's gaze raked over him. Her expression was unreadable except for the slight tilt of her lips. "Acceptable," she said finally, her voice low and approving. "Very acceptable." Nate grabbed his shirt and pulled it back on, shooting her a glare. "Glad I could entertain your dinner party." "You did more than that, I assure you," Cineri replied smoothly, her gaze lingering on him for a beat too long. Nate sat back down, muttering curses under his breath. The Vuni diners eventually returned to their meals, but Cineri never stopped watching him. "What the hell is this all about?" Nate asked finally, exasperation dripping from his voice. Cineri's expression turned serious. The teasing light faded from her silver eyes. "I brought you here for a reason, Nate Arden. My people face extinction. Our genetic lines have grown weak. You are the answer." Nate blinked, not sure he'd heard her right. What?" "You are here to help us survive," she said plainly. "Your kind possesses a genetic vitality that my people lack. You are compatible, highly compatible, in fact." Nate stared at her, his brain short-circuiting. "You're saying you brought me here to breed?" "In less crude terms, yes." Nate shoved his chair back, nearly knocking it over. "Nope, not happening." Cineri didn't move, but her voice dropped to a calm, commanding tone. "You misunderstand your position. The contract is binding." "What contract?" A holographic document appeared above the table. Nate's heart dropped as he saw his signature, his own signature, glowing at the bottom. "You signed it upon arrival," Cineri said softly. "Standard procedure. Did you not read the fine print?" Nate's mouth opened and closed, his brain reeling. "What the hell have I gotten myself into?" Nate sat frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. He glanced at the holographic contract hovering before him, his signature glowing traitorously at the bottom. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a misunderstanding. "Look, I don't know what kind of breeding program you think I signed up for," Nate stammered, dragging a hand through his hair. "But there's no way I'm going along with this. You can forget it." Cineri tilted her head, her silver eyes narrowing just a fraction. She didn't look angry. She looked amused. "Worse." "Nate, I understand this is sudden," she said smoothly, "but you underestimate the importance of this arrangement and your role in it." "I didn't sign up to save anyone's species," Nate shot back, "and I sure as hell didn't sign up for whatever this is supposed to be." He gestured vaguely at her in the room, which still buzzed with faint whispers and smirks. Cineri tapped her fingers against the table, studying him in silence. "Would it help if I explain more thoroughly?" she asked finally. "Explain what?" "Why you were chosen." Nate folded his arms across his chest. "Enlighten me." Cineri leaned forward slightly, and though her voice remained calm, there was a weight to her words that Nate couldn't ignore. "The Vuni are dying, Nate," she said softly. "Centuries of advanced technology and genetic perfection have made us fragile. Our bodies cannot sustain our lineage without outside intervention. The humans, you are biologically compatible with us, more so than any other species we have encountered." Nate frowned, his resistance faltering. She sounded so earnest, like this really was the fate of her people. But still, "Why me?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "Your physique, your genetic markers, and," she added with a teasing smile, "your defiant spirit. What's that supposed to mean?" "It's been some time since I met someone so bold, so full of fight. It's a quality that cannot be quantified, but I assure you, it's desirable." Nate felt his pulse quicken. Her voice dipped just slightly as she said that last word, and he found himself unable to look away from her. "Focus," he told himself, tearing his gaze away. "Don't let her mess with your head. Desirable or not, this isn't happening," he said firmly. "I don't care what your people need." Cineri sighed, but the expression on her face softened. "You're stronger than I anticipated," she murmured, almost to herself. "I admire that." Before Nate could respond, she rose from her chair and extended a hand. "Come with me, Nate. Allow me to show you something." "Why would I go anywhere with you?" "Because you owe it to yourself to understand what you're turning down." Nate hesitated. A part of him wanted to tell her to shove it, but another part, the part that had always been drawn to trouble, to challenges, to impossible women like Cineri, couldn't resist. "Fine," he said, getting to his feet, "but I'm not promising anything." "Of course not," she said, her lips curving into a small, knowing smile. Cineri led him through the grand ballroom and into a private chamber beyond. The room was dimly lit, bathed in soft blues and silvers, with a massive window overlooking the starlit expanse of space. It was breathtaking, but Nate barely noticed. All he could focus on was Cineri, who now turned to face him, her shimmering dress catching the faint light like liquid metal. "What is this place?" he asked, his voice low. "A sanctuary," she replied, stepping closer, away from prying eyes. Her gaze locked onto his, and for the first time, Nate felt the full weight of her presence. She was beautiful, yes, but there was something else, something raw, magnetic, and undeniably human about her. He swallowed hard as she closed the distance between them, her golden hair cascading over her shoulders. "Nate," she said softly, her voice a murmur, "I do not expect you to understand everything tonight, but I ask you to trust me." "Trust you?" he echoed, his voice catching slightly. "Yes." She reached up, her fingers brushing his jaw. Her touch was warm, gentle, and his breath hitched in his chest. "Cineri." Before he could say more, she leaned in, her lips capturing his in a kiss that sent a jolt through his entire body. It was soft and deliberate, but there was an intensity beneath it that left him breathless. He kissed her back, unable to stop himself, his hands instinctively resting on her waist. Her body was soft against his, the lines of her dress pulsing faintly where they touched. "We are not so different, you and I," she whispered against his lips. "This is insane," Nate breathed, though his arms tightened around her, pulling her closer. "Perhaps," she murmured, tilting her head to meet his gaze. "But does it not feel right?" Nate opened his mouth to protest, but no words came. In that moment, with her in his arms, and the stars glowing beyond the window, it was impossible to deny that some part of him wanted this. Her. Cineri smiled softly, as though she could read his thoughts. "Stay with me, Nate," she said. "At least for tonight." He hesitated, caught between every instinct screaming at him to run, and the undeniable pull of the woman before him. Finally, he let out a shaky breath. "One night," he said quietly. Her smile widened, and she leaned in to kiss him again, deeper this time. As their bodies pressed together, the pulsing lines of her dress glowed brighter, bathing them both in silver light. And in that private sanctuary, with the stars as their silent witnesses, Nate surrendered to the moment. Her touch was deliberate and gentle, her warmth igniting something primal yet tender within him. For all the absurdity of their encounter, this felt honest, an unspoken connection born not out of contracts or obligations, but something deeper, more instinctual. As Sceneri moved against him, her lips brushing over his skin with a reverence that disarmed him, Nate allowed the barriers he built around himself to fall away. The glow of her dress intertwined with the soft shimmer of starlight as they explored each other with quiet intimacy, every shared breath and whispered touch weaving a bridge between two worlds, an alien ambassador and a human drifting through life. It was a meeting not just of bodies but of emotions, a fleeting moment of trust where nothing else mattered. When they finally lay together, surrounded by the faint hum of the sanctuary's energy and the vast expanse of space beyond, Sceneri rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "You were wrong, Nate," she murmured softly. "About what?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "You were chosen for a reason," she said, tilting her head to look up at him, her silver eyes soft now. "Not just for your genetics, but for your spirit. I see it now." Nate sighed, his arm tightening around her. "You don't know me as well as you think, Sceneri." "Perhaps not," she replied, smiling faintly. "But I look forward to learning." He didn't respond, staring instead at the stars beyond the window. A part of him still wanted to argue, to fight back against the absurdity of the situation. But as he lay with her, her presence grounding him in a way he hadn't felt in years, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, this insane twist of fate had led him exactly where he was meant to be. And for the first time in a long while, Nate didn't feel so alone. Months later, Nate stood at the edge of the sanctuary's window, arms folded as he stared out at the glowing starscape of Luna Prime. He'd lost track of time here, not in a bad way, but in the way that life felt full for the first time in years. The planet had changed him. She had changed him. "You're brooding again," Sceneri's voice teased softly behind him. Nate turned to see her entering the room, her familiar silver dress trailing behind her like liquid light. She carried herself with the same graceful authority as the day they'd met, but something was different now. Softer, warmer. "You say brooding like I'm some kind of moody space pirate," Nate shot back, smirking. She smiled as she crossed to him, placing her hand lightly against his chest. "A noble warrior, perhaps," she amended, "or something far greater." Nate glanced down at her hand, and then into those silver eyes he'd come to know so well. "You still haven't convinced me I'm some kind of chosen hero, you know." Sceneri's smile widened. "Not a hero, Nate, but a partner. And that is far more important." As she leaned against him, her head resting gently on his shoulder, Nate found himself smiling faintly at the thought. He might not have asked for this, any of it, but for the first time in his life, he felt like he belonged. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.